goes on. Hello and welcome to another episode of Monarchismunfiltered. I'm one of your hosts, McCosk.
This is Bronze.
This is I am, with our guest, Token.
Hi, yes, hello.
And as you might have guessed, today's episode is Africa, again.
Bless them, raised them in Africa.
Third time's the charm.
Yeah, no, it's like Christian Trinitarianism, three's the number, as it were. I think we decided we were going to start by talking about ethnocentrism in relation to African monarchies, and these sort of a lot of the issues that can cause, and possibly how we can transcend that. I think probably a good place to start would be sort of to explain some of the basic issues, which is that if you were to compare monarchies in Europe, especially those that ruled over sort of multi-ethnic empires, such as I think the best example would be Austria-Hungary, where it was a very multi-ethnic country, and having this monarchy actually helped to allow the various ethnicities to do their own thing. This is not the case as much in Africa, and I was wondering if you, Token, would have some comments on this.
Hold on. Ethnocentrism, or especially with African monarchies, has been this sort of recurring issue. Austria-Hungary is a good example, but I'd also say that to some extent you also have Tsarist Russia. In the way there's been in a way, like the monarchy in and of itself is a sort of ethnocentric institution. In Ghana, you have the Ashanti, who are predominantly ethnic Akan. The sort of basis that the basis demographic that the monarchy reigns over, right? They already make up a good chunk of the Ghanaian population at 47% last time I checked. And so you have the issue of like this one seemingly domineering ethnicity, right? And how that might, isolate others, which it has, like the ethnic minorities of Ghana, where it's not that much of an issue today, but it's still an issue with African monarchy as we speak. Like another good example would be Rwanda. We've talked about Rwanda, but like Rwanda is a very good case study in general if we're talking about Africa and monarchy, because you had the Tutsis. The whole spiel about the Tutsis becoming the puppet elites. Sort of, it was a weird thing. The puppets of the Belgian colonial administration, dominating the aristocracy, as they've historically done. Same thing in Burundi, but it's not as bad because, it wasn't as bad. It never got as bad, but like it did sort of evolve over when, it boiled over when republicanism became an issue. It was actually an inverse of what happened in Rwanda, where Republican Hutu nationalists took power. Instead, you have in Burundi Tutsi military dictatorships and carrying out pogroms against the Hutus, right? Let's see. This was also an issue in like Ethiopia, where you had the northern ethnic groups dominate the national culture, the scene for a long at the time, of which I am one. Let's see. You also have South Africa, and I am, correct me on this if I'm wrong, from what I've seen, like Zulu nationalism is also tied in heavily with the monarchy, with the Inkatha Freedom Party and whatnot.
Yeah, and the big issue there is you often then run into sort of anti-Chinese, anti-Indian sentiment in relation to the sort of the whole thing of having KwaZulu-Natal, KwaZulu being home of the Zulus, and sort of conflicts with Xhosa tribes on to the west. So yeah, I mean it can get quite bad, especially when the king will make some comment about, say, Pakistanis or something, and then you'll get swords. Is like a good example.
Rwanda is like the worst case scenario of like how this boils over. And well, it's not. It might come up later. I'd like to point out now that you also have an issue with like, how do I put this? Well, you say you like right as Europe was decolonizing in the 50s and the 60s, right? You saw efforts in Rwanda by the Tutsi king, the Mwami. I can't remember his name right now. Where he did genuinely attempt to integrate the Hutus. It's a very weird thing in Rwanda. It's a weird case where you have an issue of class, clan, and ethnicity coming together and being rigidly stratified, which I'm not saying was not necessarily the case in pre-colonial Rwanda, because it very much was, and a lot of the animosity between Hutus and Tutsis stems from that. But at the same time, identity was not as solid as most people think it was, because a Hutu still become a Tutsi. The whole thing about pastoralists and settled peoples. But my main point is that you saw like efforts towards integration between the two, and then came in and took it maybe a wee bit too far.
I mean, but from all this, it is very clear that sectarian issues plague Africa. Although we've been mostly talking about ethnic ones, religious ones also come up to the fore many a time. Religious inclinations also impact this. Many, for example, a good example that I can think about is the Kingdom of Zanzibar. I think it became a kingdom in its last moments. The monarchy had a weird relationship with its people, being mostly centered on the island, not the rest of the mainland. And there was an issue. The population was a slight majority, I think, at the time, Christian, I think, and the monarchy was Muslim, basically. And that more or less doomed the monarchy twice over.
Yeah. Another issue, like speaking of Zanzibar, speaking of Zanzibar and religion, would be that I think I mentioned this in the previous episode, but I didn't really talk about it too much. It was how religion can also become tied into monarchism, right? Well, it's not as much of a pervading issue as ethnicity is. Say it's a big one, like because in Uganda you had a revival of monarchism in the 1990s, when it looked like Museveni was, sort of liberalizing, but really not, because that was the whole time when everyone was going, "Oh my God, Africa's going to embrace free market liberalism, and they're going to open up their society to democracy and whatever." Yeah, but that was it also coincided roughly with the Congo Wars, which is actually why like Ugandan monarchism today is sort of plagued with like a radical Islamicism issue, right? Where you see like it was this one rebel group, the something United Coalition for Democracy. I can't remember what the exact name is. Where it got tied in with Sudanese support, and at the time Sudan was being ruled by an overtly Islamic regime, right? And Uganda and Sudan were having like a sort of cold war over South Sudan, which basically ended in the Ugandans with American assistance cucking the Sudanese so hard South Sudan became independent. It was just a whole mess. It's the Congo Wars, right? And this day, monarchism in Uganda is either associated with Ugandan ethnocentrism and separationism, and Islamic insurgency.
Yeah, and like you also have Mateba land, which is associated with ethnic insurgency, etc., etc., etc. a lot of these sectarian divisions, some are ancient down to almost time immemorial, others are much more sinister and recent, shall we say. Some of them really only starting in the post-colonial period, not even being a fixture of colonial times. Though this particular case is fairly rare. Most of the sectarian issues, and I hope I don't have to explain, dear listener, what divide and conquer is, was more or less the base policy of colonialism pretty much everywhere. The issue is that, and as we covered in the previous episode, of not only are monarchies connoted with the previous colonial regime, there is, with time, or in some cases straight up retroactively, they became connoted with ethnicity. We see this clearly in the case of the Ethiopian monarchy, which, although always having Amhara traits, was never particularly a simulationist in its ethics, and many of the more tribal monarchies and, well, chieftaincies, but even the Sahel states, until like the Messina Jihad, you had states that were just a mixed bag in many cases, but a mix of multiple ethnicities, cultures, and in some cases religion. Hence why the Fulani Jihad and the Messina Jihad started.
Oh my God! No, please don't bring up the Fulani. As we speak, they're genociding their way through fucking northern Nigerian rural communities.
Yeah.
Hilarious.
For those who don't know, the Fulani are the main constituencies of the. Oh God, I can't believe the name is escaping me of the Islamic movement in northern Nigeria. What's their name? The
Boko Haram.
Boko Haram. Yeah, they're the main constituents. The Fulani have actually a long tradition of just insano amounts of of sometimes Sunni, but most of the time Sufi extremism.
I mean the yeah, I mean they're quite. I mean it's sort of the. I think the big issue in those regions of the Sahel as well is that desertification is exacerbating these old ethnic conflicts. Basically, that that's why they then Boko Haram exists basically because of like crop failure and desertification.
And then you have like a similar issue. Sorry to interrupt you, but like you have a similar issue with Al Shabaab in Somalia, where they blended like a radical creed of Islamism and Somali nationalism and Somali irredentism, Greater Somalia and all that. With it just became this unnatural, unholy mix. It just kept, and it still exists to this day, even though like the Somalis are now like curb stomping the Al Shabaab into like a bunch of coastal enclaves. But it's one of the mainstay issues of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing to remember, at least with Somali irredentism now, as far as I can tell, it's mainly a diaspora thing.
It feels like that a lot of the time. It really does.
Yeah, it seems similar to a lot of Albanian nationalism in that way. That like it's mainly sort of Kosovar, Kosovars that are like that. But yeah, so
That follows on
I think that is that issue of ethno-nationalism is probably in part getting worse and will lead to these kinds of problems will lead to these kinds of problems greater just because of the kind of economic issues that a lot of Africa is facing, namely desertification, so on and so forth.
But like, yeah, diaspora and Somalis really do be out there though. Like, today I will have a superiority complex even though my country has been in tatters since the 80s.
that's like typical for diasporan communities. Like even fucking Portuguese diasporans have what I can only describe as a cartoonish notion of what Portugal is.
All right, like if
This
you
is a
want to
nice
get
segue to our impromptu guest, Red Baron.
Hello.
For a first in MU history, we have someone joining mid-show.
for
Yeah.
context, Ed is a Senegalese monarchist.
Interesting.
Yes.
Since you're Senegalese, I think can you explain us like, well, it's no secret that France likes to screw around with West Africa. Care to expand upon the topic a bit?
Sure. The first, the Senegalese, we always had sort of martial, I guess, kind of stratified culture. There was always these different classes, and the French kind of came in, and they kind of built half of our capital city. It was like a small settlement before that, and they never really went into the actual country until the late 1800s. And that's when the French conquest starts, and it only really gets finished around 1892. So if you look at it, it's more of a blip in our history. It's more only 1892 to around 1965, I believe.
Fair enough, but even today, does not France has the habit of doing unrequested military interventions? I know
Yes.
that
Like in
Senegal,
Ivory Coast.
as I was saying, Senegal is not usually the target because because I'm under the impression that Senegal is relatively stable, but all the others, it's not. It isn't looking pretty if France is on the neighborhood, basically.
Basically. There was the intervention in Ivory Coast. That was like 2008 or 2007. And right now, actually, there's a slow scale war going on with the Tuaregs in Mali, Algeria, Niger. They have troops deployed in all those countries, and Senegal is a part of the mission as well. So yeah, French influence is definitely still strong.
Wait. I think you've talked about this before, like previously, but like France cucked you guys so hard, you're sending them into like the Middle East.
That's the Saudis. That's different, but yeah.
Saudis, both are detestable.
Oh, but like not a lot of people know this, but there were Senegalese soldiers in like Desert Storm, and now there's like a couple thousand in Yemen.
Yes.
That's
That's
amazing.
no good reason. I don't know why.
The brief considerations of France and West Africa aside, Red Baron, since you'll join just now, I'll put you up to date. I'll put you to speed on the topics at hand. We're discussing sectarianism and its African sectarianism, basically, and its issues with both monarchism in abstract and, well, in concrete and more generalized African politics. Since Token here and more or less the rest of us can kind of account for North, South, and East Africa, but out of West, I must admit I'm not particularly well read. So,
Well, there was a lot of kingdoms in West Africa. There was the Dahomey Benin. There was Mali Empire, which is probably the superpower of its period. It got its money through trading and whatnot, but now these empires kind of got superseded by these kind of artificial states that the French set up. So what you have is these artificial borders that divide ethnic groups, half in one country, half in another, and it just kind of makes for an all-around destructive scenario. The thing with Senegal is we got off lucky because our administrative division was by the river, the Senegalese River, which we never really went north of. And so we're a lot more stable than most African countries because we have a supermajority ethnic group, basically.
Yes, the Wolof discount Madinkas.
yeah, the state of Wolof, yeah. Yeah, it doesn't. Memory serves, the borders do match rather nicely to modern Senegal. Now that you mention it.
Hmm. And well, Mali used to be. It probably would have been another Senegal had the French not jutted the borders 90 degrees upwards into the middle of the Sahara, where there are Tuaregs and militant Islamists that don't agree at all with being ruled by a nation that's like 80% black.
I mean, with the Mali, what isn't there? I think the current movement is like Azawad, or is that sort of separate from
Yeah,
Islam?
it's the province. It's if you look at a map of Mali, there's like this triangle-looking part in the north. It's very sparsely inhabited. That's where the Tuaregs mostly live. It's as wet as you said.
I mean, it seems yeah. So yeah, because it existed from the state of Azawad. It existed from 2012 to 2013.
Hmm.
But
State.
well, yeah. I mean, everyone declares themselves a state or whatever. But
Independent.
I think that is the big issue almost is that you have especially in like I don't know, in the Sahara, Northwest Africa, they just kind of seem to have divided it up um, almost completely arbitrarily without like any regard for ethnic groups because the French never really considered the possibility of independence. So it's just sort of arbitrary divisions, which, yeah, I mean, it's quite obviously leads to more conflict than it's worth.
Hmm. Like Mauritania, it's completely invented. Like the history of Mauritania is basically being the no man's land between North Africa and West Africa. That's it. There's no sort of identity or anything there. It's just kind of something that was set up just for administrative purposes.
Yeah, I mean, also it's like 4 million people or something, so it's
Oh, that all just depends on nuts. That's the thing too. Like oh god, a lot of that part of Africa is either just black, half Arab. Going we're bro, we're Arab. Please, bro, don't call me a kafir. Or like, it's just like it's just a bunch of scattered ethnicities. Like, because in Western Mauritania, you have a bunch of Wolofs. Sure, that Red would love to annex.
Yes.
But let,
There was a short border war between us in 1992, and they kind of lost.
let's not turn the imperialism dial up, shall we? But but jokes aside, even mixed race people in Africa do tend to tend to cause issues as if they just started shit for no apparent reason. After all, it's not that these kinds of things always have a root cause.
Indeed.
But like fundamentally here is the issue that modern African states and most likely any hypothetical restored monarchy, the way they're finding to deal with these divisions, that when it isn't a race to genocide is typically by constructing a new identity, is it not?
Yes, that's what countries like Nigeria and what's
Oh,
another good example? Uh,
hasn't Ghana done
did you
that
say
for like
Rwanda? No. Ghana, yeah, Ghana's been pretty stable.
to be honest, like even though Ghana's like dominated by like one ethnicity, it's not really that bad. They're actually pretty peaceful over there if we're talking about ethnic relations, because everyone just marries each other and assimilates into the other's culture.
And an authentic Ghanaian culture is emerging. Well, it also helps that there used to be the Ghanaian Empire, which also helps to kind of create an idea of a state above people, if you get my meaning.
I mean,
Tanzania
I think South Africa has a fairly unified ethnic identity, at least in terms of the Black population.
Yes, it does.
Like there's a fair like there is a I think there is a sense of South Africanness compared to I don't know,
Ethnic
Zimbabwe
ethnocentrism.
probably would be the best example of like just like complete ethnic violence.
Hmm.
I mean, yeah, but let's not
I
ignore
mean,
apathy.
the way that the Zimbabwean government just basically overtly shown a nationalism, and we carried out a few ethnic purges. Let's that.
Yes, yeah. That's exactly what I'm thinking of. I mean, everyone, almost all Black South Africans that I know are like trilingual, um, English, and then like two Xhosa, Zulu, whatever. So, I mean, at least on that level, it seems probably more integrated than most places, or at least more integrated than like I mean, I think also Angola and Mozambique are pretty ethnically integrated, but I don't know what their demographics are.
Botswana's
Well,
like, did you say Botswana?
yeah, in Angola and Mozambique, it's there, and probably this is like truly the mark of Portuguese colonialism. The main distinctions are religious, essentially. You had
Yeah.
in the post-colonial period in Angola slight ethnic tensions, though those were just ethnic tensions that were being propped up by ideological divisions. Once the ideological divisions kind of died down, so did the ethnic tensions. Religion is really the split because while more in Angola, less so in Mozambique, we managed to convert most of them converted. You can't force conversion, nor did we in Africa. We did in India, but that's a different topic. Most of them converted to Catholicism, but you had already pre-established quite strong uh, Islamic minorities in the interior, typically related to internal slave trades, especially in Mozambique, less so in Angola because we sort of broke them when we took control of the slave trade there, and this was before we even started moving into the interior. So the idea of Angola and Mozambique due also to the fact that the idea of both territories is so old. Like Angola was named Angola and Mozambique was named Mozambique, going back to the 16th century. So so even if those were colonial administrations, they weren't colonial borders that were at the time of independence redrawn within living memory, which is kind of a point. Like Angola did not become Angola in 75. Same for Mozambique, etc., etc. Angola tends to win out because it's just managed to have a more organized political elite, essentially.
I mean, I think the other thing in Angola is that Angola and Mozambique, sorry, at least in Angola, is the war with South Africa. At
That
least, yeah, because sort of national wars are often a pretty good way to have a unified ethnic identity.
MPLA.
Yeah, obviously.
elite.
I mean, Mozambique is quite interesting, at least in its like relationship with Zimbabwe, because basically the president got bored of having to deal with the conflict between the two sides of the liberation struggle, ZANU and ZAPU. He got bored of that, and so he just had Mugabe kidnapped and forced him to sign a peace treaty with
Remember that?
yeah, this was in the like late 70s, I think.
1979.
Well, that was later. This was during the liberation struggle, because it was basically he wanted to get ZANU and ZAPU out of Mozambique, because they were causing trouble, because they were basically unemployed, with guns. So it's not
Like this whole issue, like there was this autistic fighting between Mozambique and Rhodesia at one point because of the Zimbabweans.
Yeah, and that's basically the Mozambique is the primary reason why there was the Zimbabwe Rhodesia, the transitional state, because they wanted the Bush War to be over as quickly as possible, which meant that they had the transitional thing. Obviously, then in the 90s, then that broke down, and you then get Shona nationalism sort of, and then the massacres and so forth. I think the other interesting sort of case, at least in East Africa, is sort of anti immigrant sentiment to a certain, like, is probably the best way to describe it. So, like, like Ugandan exile of Indians, or like almost everything that happened, like South African,
Or just West Africans that migrate there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and
now we're having like issues with no, you should see it now. Holy shit, because it's hilarious. Because people are just starting to straight up lynch like Chinese and other foreigners because of the whole issue with Corona and its association with the the Chinese are taking a hard hit. And I have no problem with this because fuck China, and have like the Indians and the Southeast Asians going autistic.
Yeah, I mean I think probably the most famous example that I can think of now, thinking back on it, would be Zanzibar, and the revolution in Zanzibar, where they massacred and deported most of the like Arab elite. Which, I mean, yeah, it's like, I don't know, 10 centuries of slavery. It's not a good way to establish peaceful relationships. And I think that's actually quite an interesting case, because I think that's probably the most direct case of an association between the monarchy and an ethnic group, leading to some kind of genocide.
That happened in like Rwanda too, back in the 60s, like early 1960 or whatever, where the Tutsi, because there was an uprising where there were like a bunch of pogroms of like the Tutsis, it drove like 300,000 Tutsis out of the Rwanda, and like to create a diaspora sort of like centered on the Great Lakes, Tanzania, Uganda. I mean, like, where do you think the RPF came from? The Tutsi monarchy had to flee into exile, where it still is in like Virginia, I think, in the United States.
I mean, they always end up in some place in the US. I mean, well, the Albanian monarchy are currently in Johannesburg, I think.
Weird.
Which I find hilarious.
I thought the Albanian, I thought Prince Lenka II had returned to Albania.
They might have.
Albania.
I know one of them was born in South Africa on in the embassy or something.
The ever traditional peak trad people here. You're either born on the embassy of your country, or better yet, on a hotel that flies the flag of your country to get that nationality.
I mean, Claridge's in London is famous for so many of its rooms belonging to different nationalities because different royalty were born there.
Epic.
I mean, there was a time during the Second World War where obviously a lot of monarchs had fled to Britain, and so and also Claridge's had a line to Buckingham Palace. So people, important people would call Claridge's and say, "Hello, can I speak to the king?" To which the porter would reply, "And which king would that be?"
Respectful porter.
Santon Clinic, Johannesburg.
Yeah, it was declared. I think it was declared Albanian territory, so as to have him. Yeah.
Zulu. Damn. He's a Zulu. He's an honorary Zulu now.
Yeah, the South African government declared his maternity ward temporarily Albanian territory to ensure Leka was born on Albanian soil, which was mainly to fuck with Hoja, which is epic. Whatever. I think, however, the as we've sort of gone over with all these sort of ethnic separatism issues, I think it does point to this issue that that the transition to republicanism has in many places exacerbated already existing ethnic tensions. And I think one of the sort of key advantages sort of historically for monarchy has been the prevention of sort of democratic overflow, where in the sense that, like, if you look at, say, if you look at a lot of democracies in Africa, places will vote, and even generally in the third world, in ethnically divided places, you'll have political parties that administer to a certain ethnic group. And if the government then has to appeal to the sort of sentiments or prejudices of specific ethnic groups, you end up producing more ethnic conflict. Obvious examples of this would be Rwanda or wherever else. And I think that really is one of the advantages of monarchy, is that it can, to a greater degree, avoid that problem by making it that the government is not fully adherent to the arbitrary whims of certain ethnic groups.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, like monarchy can transcend ethnicity. This was like the case. This has historically been the case in places like Ethiopia. What else?
All the great African empires, it was like this. I mean, one could make the case that it's always the case with whole empires. But the fundamental issue that this brings us up to is the often spicy, for the lack of a better word, relationship of nationalism and monarchism, and how often that causes quite a bit of consternation on both sides of the argument.
Yep.
Right. Like the only scenario I guess I can think of where a monarchy was directly tied to like a certain region is like Italy during the unification. But then you turn around and when they had a referendum, this ones that were the most monarchist were the South, who were just conquered about 30 years ago by the king from the North. So it does really transcend ethnicity a lot of the time.
Yeah, a fundamental issue is that, like, I just think, personally, because we're now winding down, I guess this is the time where we air out our opinions, I suppose. Personally, I think that tying monarchism to nationality is a good way to collapse the whole thing into nothingness.
Think of like a sort of like imperium principle, right? Where, monarchy transcends everything, the dynasty transcends everything, etc., etc. Loyalty to the king, whatever.
Even in Europe, the unification of monarchy and nationalism produced disastrous results, and that often it was the nationalism part that rose up to overthrow the monarchy. And this nowhere was this more clear than in Serbia, where the kings were regularly killed because they were perceived to have betrayed the esoteric truth, I suppose, of greater Serbdom.
I mean, a very good example, I think, of monarchy transcending ethnicity is in Scotland. The Scottish Nationalist Party are specifically pro-monarchy, so they've explicitly said they'll keep the Queen as head of state, to the point that they essentially have to defend themselves from accusations of disloyalty to the monarchy. Yet the very same Scots will despise the English in general, and same for the reverse is also true, which I think is an interesting case that we have sort of IRL, quote unquote, or like right now, even in Europe. Obviously, you have differences in places like Catalonia, where it is a republican separatism, but obviously the Spanish monarchy is much less popular or entrenched, I think.
Yeah, the Spanish monarchy is its own beast. But more, perhaps less successful example of this is Belgium. Even if the old adage goes, there is only one Belgian person on the planet, and that's the king. Even that does kind of show the role that they play.
Yeah, the king usually tends to be a mix of all sorts of ethnicities. Looking at it historically, like this, Prince of Albania, his mother is Australian and his father is Albanian. I'm pretty sure Kaiser Wilhelm's mother was English, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of hard to any one ethnic group to claim that the king is theirs.
I mean, the most hilarious example is that the current Queen of Sweden, maybe Bronze can correct me on this, but it's either the current Queen of Sweden or Norway that whose bloodline goes all the way back to tribal Brazilian aristocracy.
I think that's Sweden.
Yeah, it's Sweden.
Sweden is Brazilian.
I mean,
there was some weird mix-ups, really. I mean, never forget we could have almost had Ethiopian anime when there was plans for the Ethiopian royal family to Japanese one.
That's the thing you're gonna focus on, not the many thousands of years of rich Japanese culture that have existed, but anime. That's the thing you're gonna mention.
Yes.
I think Ethiopian anime would be amazing. Naruto, but Ethiopian.
Listen. I blame Europe and South Africa. It's not fair. Why couldn't we could have become, entered personal union. We could have into Japan.
The African Japan.
African Japan. Actually, no. To be honest, I think that if it had actually gone through, I guarantee you probably would have seen you'd either see one of two things, right? Because this was already happening at a fast rate that terrified Europe or Western Europe. You see the Japanese further permeate. You see the Japanese get further involved in anti-colonialism, real actual anti-colonialism, and not just sicko mode on East Asia and LARPing as anti-colonialists, hacking anti-colonialism in Africa. They were already doing that with black nationalism in the U.S., where you saw the whole Back to Africa movement get supported by the Japanese. The Back to Africa movement was also very overtly authoritarian, right wing. as opposed to like the modern black nationalist movements today that we see in the New World. It had been that, like Japan just be the new China. Japan would basically be another China, you know?
How so? What would you mean by be another China? Just like
Exactly what I mean. I am. You are also African. Listen, I mean, like basically, like invest and the whole for the initiative.
Okay, yeah. Okay, I thought you meant like warlord era China.
I mean, like today, contemporary.
Yeah. I mean, I think the bigger thing would have been that it would have been harder for Mussolini to invade, because Mussolini, invaded Ethiopia, and all this, and he was basically able to do that largely just because the British didn't care and Ethiopia was politically isolated.
And they also tried to sell us back behind our backs.
It being less isolated. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that would have been...
Back in 1935.
Yeah. I think... Well, what... In terms of the Ethiopian monarchy, do you think it was... Because you say it was northern ethnicities, or there was supported primarily by northern ethnicities. Do you think that it was sort of like directly tied, or how closely tied do you think it was to those?
I probably didn't make a good. I probably didn't. It wasn't a good analogy or whatever. It's directly tied to like it's in a lot of cases the Ethiopian monarchy has been like the Ethiopian monarch, the Solomonid, right? It's a direct result of like all the northern cultures, Tigrayans, Amaras, like when I mean northern, I mean like most of northern and central Ethiopia compared to like the new southern regions, which we even controlled in medieval times before the wars with Adal and the Aroma migrations forced us back into the highlands for a time. And, like the ethnicities I'm talking about are like Amaras, Gurage, some Nilots that we assimilated. After we raped them.
Yeah. So slight microphone issues on your end, Token.
What? How much did you?
Yeah. So I mean, I think the other thing to remember with Ethiopia is obviously that it was very underdeveloped when it had the monarchy. I mean, it's probably not much better now. So in sort of, in the time period when communication is not particularly good, it generally helps to have a core supporter base, which usually will end up being some kind of ethnicity.
To be honest, no, because ethnicity was never really that relevant in comparison to say like religion, and even then, we were tolerant of like the considerable Muslim minorities, the Muslim Highlanders, some groups that basically didn't shit on us back in the 1600s. The Afars and the minorities.
Who was the emperor who converted to Islam? The emperor who converted to Islam, who got deposed.
Catholicism.
And
that was a whole mess, man. Oh my god. Oh, because like the Portuguese, the Jesuits in particular, wouldn't stop messing around in internal Ethiopian affairs after they came in to try and help us with the whole wars with Adal. And just Portugal just generally becoming more and more involved around the Red Sea. You had the Jesuits just coming in, interfering with internal government and theological affairs. That was a theological dispute that lasted like a century, last time I checked.
Yes, we were known to cause theological disputes that lasted a century or more, some of them still ongoing as we speak.
Over stuff like us observing the Sabbath and what else?
I mean, I remember that the ones we
Sure,
called,
Christ.
I remember that the ones we caused in Ethiopia weren't as petty as the ones we caused in India, which were like record pettiness on our part. Well, if you don't write this exact same way, you are literally a heretic, and I'm going to send the Inquisition on you. And that's how we created an entire denomination of Catholic Christian non-apostolic churches in India.
Portugal. Remember when Portugal was basically the Imperium of Man?
If the Imperium of Man only hold small fortresses and peddled drugs, yes, I suppose.
Probably do.
Yeah, I'd imagine the Imperium of Man is into that kind of thing.
Fair enough. I mean, to wrap this up, I guess. In this episode, we basically went over how sectarianism and religious divisions impact both contemporary African politics, but also like how they impacted in the past and how they continue to influence the political landscape, and how that is the main obstacle to overcome in Africa and to a lesser degree the rest of the world, I suppose. How to either decouple the monarchy from the historical groups that dominated, or to help or to detach it from this or that specific religion. In many ways, an issue that is timeless, but still very much present. If you, dear listener, have any suggestions on how the various African dynasties and monarchies could overcome this issue, please feel free to send us an email.
Yeah, if you have suggestions on how to end sort of centuries-old ethnic conflicts, I think
please write.
Yeah,
Please like, comment, and subscribe.
Yeah,
I think the like, comment, and subscribe is more important than the send us emails detailing how to solve centuries-old ethnic conflicts.
probably also write to some other people that can actually do anything about it.
More important than Africa is.
Yeah. So, yeah, we've been Monarchism Unfiltered. This has been somewhat rambling episode about Africa. Hope you have a nice day.
Like, comment, and subscribe, and write to us on how to solve genocide and ethnic conflicts. Yeah.
Nice.
Colonialism.